Thanksgiving, my parents slid me an envelope and a one-way ticket, and my sister filmed like it was pay-per-view. Dad said, "Take the money and disappear." I smiled, pocketed the check, and then let them toast my fresh start after I sold my startup for millions. What would you do? If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. Thanksgiving at my parents' house in Portland looked normal from the street. Warm lights in the windows, the smell of turkey leaking into the cold air. My dad's truck parked a little crooked like always, and if you didn't know my family, you'd think you were walking into one of those postcard holidays where everyone hugs and laughs and nobody keeps score. But the second I stepped through that front door, I felt it. That familiar pressure in my chest, like the house itself was waiting for me to fail, and I did what I always do with them. I made myself smaller. I smiled first. I offered to help in the kitchen. I said all the safe words, and then my younger sister, Madison, breezed past me in a perfect outfit with her perfect blowout hair and her perfect look at me laugh, and my mom, Denise, lit up like somebody just turned on a lamp. "There's my girl," she said, and my dad, Carl, gave Madison the kind of proud nod he never once gave me, and I could feel the old script loading in my head like a program I didn't even choose to run. Madison gets celebrated for breathing. I get tolerated if I stay convenient. And if you've lived that life, you already know the rule. Do not arrive with needs. Do not arrive with hopes. Do not arrive expecting warmth, because they will treat your hope like a joke and then act confused when you stop showing up. We ate in the dining room with the mahogany table my parents loved because it looked expensive, and everything was arranged like a stage set. The good plates, the cloth napkins folded like little triangles, the fake centerpieces, and my aunt and uncle and cousins were there too, the kind of relatives who watch family dynamics like it's a sport but never step onto the field. They just chew quietly and pretend they didn't see anything when a line gets crossed. I sat where I always sit, not quite centered, not quite included, and I kept my face neutral while my mom did her usual performance. We're just grateful. Family is everything, and my dad kept filling people's glasses like generosity could cover up the sharpness in his voice. Madison talked about her job, and she made it sound like she was running the whole company, even though last I heard she'd been at that marketing firm 5 minutes, and my parents ate it up. So impressive, so driven, so proud. And nobody asked me anything because that would require them to admit I exist as more than an extra in Madison's life. And then, right when everyone was settling into that comfortable hum, forks clinking, someone laughing at Madison's story, my dad leaned back like he owned the room and raised his voice just enough to cut through it all. "We thought it was time we had to talk about your future, Raina." And the way he said my name felt like he was calling a dog to heel. And the room did that thing it always does when someone's about to be publicly corrected. It got quiet, but not caring quiet. It got curious quiet. Like people at a restaurant turning to watch a couple argue. My mom smiled, but it was that tight smile that never reaches her eyes. The one that says she's already decided you're wrong and she's just waiting for you to accept it politely. And she slid an envelope across the table toward me like she was handing me a bill. It landed next to my water glass with this soft little thud that somehow sounded louder than it should have, like punctuation, like the end of something. "Your father and I have been talking," she said, and she didn't say it like parents who worry. She said it like managers who are tired of an employee. "We think you need a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere far from here where you can finally figure things out." Somewhere else. Somewhere far. I stared at the envelope, and I didn't touch it, because my body knew before my brain did what this was. It was the same energy as every time they said, "We just want what's best for you," right before they did something that served them. Madison was sitting across from me, and I caught a movement, her hand sliding under the table, then back up, and there it was, her phone angled toward me, the tiny red glowing on the screen, recording, and I swear my stomach dropped because that's how committed she was to my humiliation. She wanted footage. She wanted a souvenir of me breaking, so she could replay it later when she needed to feel superior. My dad nodded at the envelope like he was giving me permission to speak. "Open it," he said, and his tone wasn't harsh. It was worse. It was satisfied. I reached for it slowly because every eye in that room was waiting, and I could feel the heat of the moment crawling up my neck. And inside the envelope was a check for $10,000 and a one-way plane ticket to Austin dated for the following Monday, and my mom said, "10,000 should be more than enough to get you settled." And then she added, casually, like she was labeling a box, "We picked Austin because it's affordable and has opportunities for people like you." People like you. Say that out loud and tell me it doesn't sting, because it's not about money. It's about what they think you are worth. It's about them packaging you as a problem and shipping you away with a bow on top. My dad tapped the edge of the ticket with one finger and said, "Portland clearly isn't working for you, Raina. Your little tech thing hasn't gone anywhere. You're 29 and still living like a college student. It's embarrassing." Embarrassing. That word landed like a slap because it wasn't new. It was familiar. It was the theme song of my childhood, the time I built a robot for the science fair and won. And they didn't show because Madison had a soccer game where she sat on the bench. The time I gave a graduation speech and my mom complained it was too long. The time I got a scholarship letter and my dad said, "I hope you're paying for the rest yourself." And yes, I did. I worked 3 jobs. I lived on ramen and black coffee. I coded in a cramped studio apartment while the world slept, and I built my company piece by piece in silence, because silence was safer than being laughed at. I held that check and ticket, and here's the thing, I didn't feel shame. I felt clarity, like someone finally admitted the truth out loud. They weren't helping me. They were paying me to disappear, and Madison giggled like this was the funniest thing she'd ever witnessed, and her husband, Trent, smirked beside her, the kind of smirk a man makes when he's enjoying cruelty he didn't have to commit. My mom reached across the table and patted my hand like I was a child being sent to summer camp. "This is for the best, sweetheart. Sometimes people need a push," and my dad nodded like he'd just solved a problem. And I smiled, a small calm smile, the kind that made Madison's recording hand wobble because she didn't get the breakdown she ordered, and I folded the check carefully, not because I respected it, but because I respected myself, and I said, "Thank you," softly, and my mom's shoulders relaxed like she'd won, and my dad exhaled like he didn't have to deal with me anymore. And Madison's expression flickered because she wanted me messy. She wanted tears. She wanted proof that I knew my place. Let me pause and ask you something, and I mean this sincerely. Where are you watching from right now? What state, what town, what little corner of the world are you sitting in? Because I want to know if families like mine are everywhere, or if I just got lucky in the worst way. And while you're typing that, tell me this too. If your parents handed you a one-way ticket and cash at the holiday table like you were a problem to relocate, would you take it? Would you rip it up? Or would you do what I did and play it so calm they couldn't read you anymore? Because while they were smiling at me like they'd just cleaned their hands, my phone buzzed once in my purse. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet vibration that made my heart kick. And I already knew what it was because earlier that morning, before I walked into that house, I had signed final paperwork in a glass conference room downtown with my lawyer sitting beside me, and a man in a suit across from me smiling like he'd just bought something valuable. And the words on that document were, still burning behind my eyes, acquisition finalized, $8.5 million, paid within 14 business days. And no, my family didn't know, not my parents, not Madison, not Trent, not the cousins watching like it was theater, because I stopped updating them on my life the day my dad laughed at my first investor pitch, and my mom told me to apply for receptionist jobs until I grew out of the tech phase. So I sat there, holding their $10,000 insult like it was a prop, while my brain was already 10 steps ahead, calculating, not revenge like a movie villain, but consequences like an engineer, because that's what I do. I build systems, and I understand inputs and outputs, and I understood exactly what would happen when the truth surfaced. My aunt leaned in and said, "That's very generous of your parents." And I almost laughed because generosity isn't humiliating someone in front of relatives and filming it. Generosity isn't calling your child embarrassing and then pretending you're being kind. And my uncle chimed in about rock bottom and hard resets like he was giving a motivational speech, and Madison kept adjusting her phone angle, trying to capture my face. And my mom kept talking about Austin like she was choosing a retirement community for me, and my dad kept looking around the table for approval, and everyone fed in the approval because it's easier to clap for cruelty than to confront it. I nodded along. I kept my voice polite. I let them believe they were in control because there's a special kind of power in letting someone underestimate you. It makes them careless. And then my dad lifted his glass and said, "To new beginnings." And Madison laughed and echoed it, and I raised my water and smiled back. And in that moment, right there at the table, I made a quiet decision that would change everything. I would take their ticket. I would take their check, and I would leave Portland exactly like they wanted, but not as their failure, as their secret. And then I would let the world introduce me properly. And if you think that's petty, good, because sometimes petty is just self-respect with a sharper edge. And the best part is they had no idea the wave was already forming behind them, because while they were busy celebrating the idea of me disappearing, my lawyer's email was sitting at the top of my inbox like a match waiting for oxygen, and all I had to do was let the news breathe. I stayed in that living room after dessert longer than I wanted, not because I enjoyed a second of it, but because leaving too fast would have given Madison the dramatic ending she was fishing for. The tearful walkout, the slammed door, the "look how unstable she is" storyline she could replay for years. So I sat there with my coffee getting cold in my hands while they all talked around me like I was furniture. My dad laughing too loud at his own jokes. My mom doing that performative "are you okay, sweetheart" voice that isn't concern, it's surveillance, and Madison showing vacation photos on her phone like her life was a magazine spread. Hawaii sunsets, champagne flutes, her and Trent kissing in front of a waterfall, and every picture came with my parents' oohs and ahs. Beautiful. So proud. You two are living. And then my mom glanced at me like she remembered I existed and said, "Austin will be good for you. Raina, fresh start, less pressure." And I wanted to laugh because the only pressure in Portland was them. Their eyes, their expectations, their constant need to rank everyone in the family like it's a scoreboard. At one point, my uncle leaned over and said, "Sometimes rock bottom is a gift." And my aunt nodded like she was quoting scripture, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek because imagine telling someone they're at rock bottom while they're quietly holding an $8.5 million exit in their pocket, like the universe has a sense of humor, and it is not polite. Then I excused myself to use the bathroom, and I didn't actually need to go, I just needed air, and I walked down that hallway where the family photos lived, the ones that tell the official story. Madison in every frame, Madison with trophies, Madison in a cap and gown, Madison hugging my parents, and me, if I was in there at all, I was cropped to the side like an afterthought. And I stood there staring at a picture from years ago, and it hit me how early they trained me to accept smallness. How they taught me to be grateful for scraps, and I felt that old familiar anger rise, hot, clean, and focused, not chaotic anger, not emotional explosion anger, but the kind that makes you plan. I paused near the hallway corner, and that's when I heard them because they assumed I was out of range. My dad's voice first, relaxed, satisfied. That went better than expected, and my mom answered, "Much better." I thought she'd make a scene. And Madison laughed like it was entertainment. She knows she doesn't have a choice. What's she gonna do? Keep pretending her little tech thing is going somewhere? And Trent chimed in with that smug tone men get when they're punching down. Honestly, 10 grand is generous. She's been mooching off your goodwill for years. And my mom sighed like she was tired of carrying me. 10,000 is more than she deserves. At least this way she'll leave quietly, and we can finally move on. I just hope she doesn't come back when it runs out. And my dad chuckled, actually chuckled. If she does, we ignore her calls. Once she's in Austin, she's not our problem anymore. And Madison added, "I can't wait to tell everyone she finally left. People always ask about her at events, and I never know what to say." Let me tell you something. Hearing people call you an embarrassment hurts, but hearing your own mother say you deserve less hurts in a different way. It's like realizing the safety net you thought existed is actually made of razor wire, and I stood there in that hallway with my hands clenched, so tight my nails dug into my palms, and the wild part is I wasn't surprised. I was confirmed, like someone finally said the quiet part out loud. And, in a strange way, it made me calmer because now I didn't have to wonder if I was being too sensitive or imagining it. No, they meant it. They always meant it. So I walked back into the living room with my face neutral, not because I wasn't burning, but because I wasn't giving them the satisfaction of seeing the burn. My mom turned to me instantly with that syrupy, sweet voice. "Everything okay?" And I said, "Perfect." And I watched her relax again because she thought my obedience meant she was right. We stayed another hour, small talk, coffee, laughter that didn't include me, and Madison kept making little comments like darts. "Austin has a lot of gig work. You'll meet new people. Maybe you'll finally figure out what you want to do." And each one was designed to sound helpful while reminding everyone I was the family project, and I kept answering with calm little nods because the calmer I was, the more uncomfortable she got. Her brain couldn't process it. She wanted tears. She got poise. She wanted desperation. She got stillness. Around 9 I stood up, put on my coat, and my dad said, "Long drive back?" Like he cared, and I said, "Yeah," and my mom hugged me stiffly and whispered, "Good luck, sweetheart." And I thought, luck has nothing to do with it, and Madison waved from the couch without standing, "Send pics." And Trent raised his glass again like a clown with confidence. "To new beginnings," and I said, "To new beginnings, back." And then I walked out the front door and didn't look back because there was nothing behind me worth looking at. The drive home was quiet on purpose, no radio, just the hum of the tires and my thoughts stacking like bricks. And the minute I got back to my studio apartment, I set my purse on the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the acquisition agreement again. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to see it like a fact, like a wall, like something solid that couldn't be rewritten by my family's version of me. And there was the numbers, the signatures, the timeline, 14 business days. And I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. Then I started moving like I was on a mission because this wasn't just money, it was a door, and I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to walk through it. First, I opened a fresh document and made a list, not a fantasy list, a logistics list, because that's how I stay sane. Address updates, bank notifications, movers, new lease, forwarding mail, and then I added a second list called boundaries, and under it I wrote one line: no announcements, no warnings, no arguments, because if you announce your next move to people who enjoy controlling you, they'll try to sabotage it. They'll stir drama. They'll create emergencies. They'll suddenly need you. And I was done playing that game. I emailed my lawyer to confirm the PR timing because here's the detail people don't talk about. Acquisitions don't just magically appear in the news. There's coordination, there's a press release, there's a media embargo, there's a schedule, and my lawyer replied that the announcement was already queued for release after the holiday weekend, which meant I didn't have to do anything dramatic. I just had to wait and keep my mouth shut. And that was almost poetic, because silence had been forced on me my whole life, and now silence was my weapon. The next day, I did the unglamorous work. I called a moving company and spoke in that calm professional voice I use when I'm negotiating. I asked about dates, insurance, item lists. I booked a pickup for the end of the week. And then I called the leasing office in Austin for the apartment I'd already secured quietly weeks before because I knew this exit was coming. I paid the deposit from my own account. I signed the lease electronically, and I printed the confirmation and tucked it into a folder like I was building evidence of my new life. Then I walked to the bank and deposited my parents' $10,000 check without blinking, not because I needed it, but because it was the only payment they'd ever offered for the years they stole from me. And I watched the teller stamp it and slide the receipt back, and I thought, you can't buy forgiveness, but you can absolutely fund your freedom with their disrespect. And if that makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself why you're more worried about them feeling wrong than you are about me being wronged. That night I packed, not dramatically, methodically, boxes labeled by room, cables bagged and tagged, documents sealed in a waterproof folder, and every time I hit something sentimental, a college notebook, an old hoodie, a photo from the one time I thought my mom was proud of me, I didn't stop to cry. I just kept moving because the truth is I already did my crying years ago. And I wasn't about to grieve people who were still alive, but never showed up for me. By Sunday night, my apartment looked like an organized disappearance, and that's exactly what it was. And then Monday morning, I went to the airport with the one-way ticket they bought thinking it would be my exile, and I sat in that seat on the plane with my laptop open, and my face calm while the flight attendant offered pretzels like this was just another day. And I thought about how my parents believed they were pushing me out of the family like taking out trash, and the funny thing is they were right about one thing, I was leaving, but they were wrong about what that meant because they thought leaving would make me smaller, and I knew leaving was going to make me impossible to ignore. Austin hit me like warm air and sunlight, the city buzzing, people walking fast, music spilling out of bars even in the afternoon, and I took a cab to my new place and watched the skyline pass by thinking, so this is what it feels like to exist without being watched. And when I unlocked the door to that apartment, bigger than anything I'd ever let myself want, I stood in the empty living room and laughed once, quietly, because the peace felt unreal. I didn't call anyone, I didn't post anything, I didn't announce a new chapter. I just set my suitcase down and let the silence do what it was always meant to do, protect me. And then, 3 days after Thanksgiving, while I was sitting in a coffee shop near my new place, my phone started buzzing like it was possessed, call after call after call from Portland numbers I knew by heart, and I didn't even have to open the news to know the press release had dropped, because desperation has a sound, and it sounds exactly like family who only remembers you exist when the world starts clapping for you. My phone kept vibrating on the cafe table like a trapped insect, and I didn't rush to grab it, because the first rule of dealing with people who dismissed you is this: don't sprint to the same hands that shoved you out. Let them feel the distance they created. And then I finally flipped the screen over and saw the names stacking up like a panic ladder. Dad, Mom, Madison, Trent. Even my Aunt Linda, who hasn't said my name correctly since 2011, and I knew exactly what happened without opening a single app because I'd lived this pattern my whole life. They ignore you until the world validates you, and then suddenly they remember your family, and I took one slow sip of coffee, set the cup down, and opened the news anyway just to watch the headline with my own eyes. Portland startup acquired for $8.50 million. And right under it was a photo I didn't choose but didn't hate either. Me mid-sentence at some pitch event months ago, shoulders back, eyes forward, the face of someone who built something while starving quietly, and I laughed once under my breath because 3 days ago my dad called me a low-ceiling kid, the one who would never be impressive, and now the internet was calling me a founder and an operator and a technical mind. And the wild part is the article wasn't even dramatic. It was clean and professional and factual. The kind of writing that doesn't care about your family's opinion. It just reports reality. And then the phone rang again and again, and I didn't answer because I needed to hear what they sounded like when they realized their favorite punching bag had receipts. The first voicemail was my mom, voice suddenly sweet, trembling at the edges like she'd practiced crying in the mirror. Raina, honey, we just saw the news. Why didn't you tell us? This is incredible. Call me back. We're so proud of you. And I actually stared at the wall for a second because the phrase "we're so proud of you" landed like a bad joke, like hearing someone applaud a play they tried to shut down. And then another voicemail from my dad hit, and his tone was different, not soft, more like he was late to a meeting he still believed he controlled. Raina, this is your father. Call me immediately. There are financial implications here, tax considerations, you need guidance. And I smiled because, of course, he went straight to guidance. The same man who refused to guide me with anything except criticism now wanted to help manage money he didn't earn. And then Madison texted, all caps like we were best friends. OMG, Raina, I had no idea. Call me. And I imagine her with her phone in hand pacing like the floor was lava because she knew deep down that the video she recorded would look very different under this headline. And then Trent called twice back to back, which is always a power move when a guy thinks he's entitled to your time, and I let it ring until it stopped. Because you don't negotiate your boundaries with people who treat your life like a group project they didn't contribute to. Here's what was happening on their side while I sat in a calm cafe in a city that didn't know my family story. My dad was probably walking in circles with that stiff jaw, rehearsing how to reframe the past. My mom was likely already texting her friends and trying to spin herself into supportive mother of successful founder. Madison was sweating because her smugness had a timestamp. And then, because families like mine love theater, someone would suggest a celebration dinner, as if a dinner could erase a decade of neglect. And if you've ever been through this, tell me in the comments. Do you think families should get front row access to your wins when they bought tickets to your downfall? Yes or no? I want to see where you stand, because some people swear blood is blood. And I'm here to tell you, blood without respect is just a stain you keep trying to wash out. I didn't respond right away, not because I was playing games, but because I was making decisions, and this is where the how matters, not the what. So let me show you exactly what I did instead of just saying I ignored them. I went into my phone settings and turned off message previews so I wouldn't get ambushed by guilt paragraphs on the lock screen, and then I made a folder called Family and dragged every thread into it, because organization is emotional control, and then I listened to each voicemail once. Not repeatedly, once, because replaying is how they hook you back into old pain, and then I wrote down key lines in my notes app like evidence, we're proud, you need guidance, call me immediately, because when you grow up gaslit, you learn to document reality. And then I called my lawyer, not my family, my lawyer, and I said, the press is live, they're contacting me, I want a standard response line for any family outreach. And she said, do not engage, we'll handle any legal interference. And I felt this wave of calm, because once you have professional boundaries, family chaos starts to look small. Then I did something that will make some people clutch their pearls. I played my mom's voicemail again, but this time I didn't let it sting. I listened like a scientist, measuring the tone shift, because the lesson here for anyone watching is simple. Watch how fast someone's respect appears when your value becomes public. That tells you everything about what they actually loved. And then I saw it, the first crack in their mask, because my Aunt Linda texted, your mother is beside herself, call her, she loves you. And I laughed out loud quietly, because beside herself is what people say when consequences finally show up. And then my cousin Jared messaged, congrats, can you send me your new address? And I didn't answer that either, because sudden curiosity is not the same as care. And then, like clockwork, the tone shifted from celebration to entitlement. My dad texted, we deserve to be part of this. You wouldn't be here without us raising you. And there it was, the invoice, the emotional invoice parents send when they want to collect on basic parenting. And then Madison tried a different angle. I'm sorry if anything I said came off wrong. I was just worried about you. Worried, sure, because recording me at Thanksgiving was definitely worry. And Trent sent, family is everything. Don't make this ugly, which is what people say when they're the ones who made it ugly first. Now listen closely, because this is the mid-video moment where I need you to do something real for us. If you're watching and you've ever lived through family disrespect like this, and you want more stories that break down the psychology and the power plays step by step, kindly join our community by subscribing. Thank you, alright, because the next part of this story is where the masks come fully off and the nice act turns into something else. Back to the cafe, I paid my bill, walked outside into the Texas sun, and I didn't hide, I didn't panic, I didn't rush to prove myself, I did the opposite. I took a slow walk through the neighborhood and let my body learn a new truth, that success doesn't require permission from the people who doubted you. And then I went home and did the cleanest, most surgical thing I've ever done in my life. I blocked them, but not in a dramatic, I'm done text first, because that invites debate. I blocked them silently, one by one, like closing tabs you don't need open anymore. Mom, Dad, Madison, Trent, Aunt Linda, Uncle Rob, and then I went into every social platform and did the same, because boundaries are not speeches, they're actions. But I didn't stop there because I'm not reckless. I'm strategic. I forwarded any messages that hinted at financial pressure to my lawyer, and I locked down my credit with a freeze because some families don't just feel entitled emotionally. They get bold financially, and I changed my emergency contacts, and I updated my mailing address to a P.O. box because peace is built with details, not vibes. That night, as I sat on my couch in a new city with boxes still half unpacked, I got an email from an unknown address, and I knew it was Madison before I opened it because she writes like she talks, a lot of words, very little accountability, and the email was pages long, full of vague apologies and dramatic feelings. I've been under pressure. I didn't mean it. We should talk. We're sisters. And not once did she say, I filmed you because I wanted to humiliate you. And that's how you tell when someone's sorry versus when they're scared. Sorry people name the knife. Scared people complain about the blood. I archived it, and then my building concierge called up and said there were flowers downstairs for me, and I knew it was my mom because she loves performative gestures that can be screenshot. And I told them to donate the flowers to the lobby for residents to take because I'm not decorating my new life with old manipulation. And then, just when I thought they'd retreat, I got the next escalation, a message from a mutual acquaintance back in Portland. Hey, your mom reached out. She's asking for your new address. She says she wants to fly in and celebrate. And I told the acquaintance politely, do not share my information. And then I sat there realizing something that might help you too. When people lose access to you, they recruit others to pressure you. That's called triangulation, and it's not love. It's control wearing perfume. I went to bed thinking I'd finally cut the cord clean, but the next morning brought the real twist. Not the calls, not the texts, not the fake pride. Something sharper, because my lawyer emailed me with one line that made my stomach drop and my focus sharpen at the same time. Your father contacted our office asking for a meeting about the acquisition and potential family arrangements, and then he asked whether you had set up any trusts. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be about feelings anymore. It was going to be about access, money, and rewriting the story in public, and I promise you, the next move they made was the one that showed exactly who they were when the spotlight hit them, and then it forced me to decide whether my silence would stay kind or finally become loud. When my lawyer said my father asked about trusts, my first instinct was to laugh, and then my second instinct was to stop laughing immediately because that one word, trusts, tells you the game has changed from we're proud to how do we get a handle on her. And I need you to understand the exact way this played out because people think family greed looks like yelling and demands, but the most dangerous version is the calm, polite, strategic kind that hides behind concern and paperwork. And then I asked my lawyer one question. Did he ask for a meeting with me or with you? And she said, with me? And that right there is the giveaway, because if this was about love, he'd be calling me like a human being, but if it's about leverage, he calls the person with legal access. And then I said, send me a summary of what he asked. And she forwarded his email, and it was written like a man ordering a service, not like a father reaching for a daughter. And it said he wanted to ensure Reina is protected, and he wanted to discuss tax-efficient structures, and he wanted to coordinate family planning. And I almost choked on my own air because 3 days ago he was calling me an embarrassment, and now he's suddenly father of the year, worried about my protection. And then I told my lawyer, no meeting, no calls, and if he pushes, I want everything in writing. Because when someone's story keeps changing, you don't give them your voice, you make them put it on paper where it can't wiggle away. And then the next move came fast because my father doesn't like being told no, and he's not the type to accept a boundary. He's the type to test it like a locked door. So he went around the lawyer and tried the soft route first. He had my Aunt Linda call from her number and leave a voicemail that started with, "Sweetheart, your father is worried. You know he's old-fashioned, he doesn't mean harm." And then she slid into, "He just wants to make sure you don't get taken advantage of, and also, your mother wants to fly in, and we can all have a nice dinner." And that's the oldest trick in the book. the sandwich, insult your intelligence, pretend it's love, and then ask for access. And I didn't call her back because calling back turns it into a conversation, and conversations are where they pull you into old roles. And then I texted her one line, "Please don't contact me about this again." And I blocked her too, because if someone volunteers to be the messenger for your oppressor, they're not neutral, they're participating. And then my cousin Jared tried, and his message was pretending to be casual. "Yo, congrats, crazy news. Dad said he wants to make sure you're good. You should talk to him." And I replied, "I am good." And then I didn't respond after that, because the moment you defend yourself, they act like they're helping you, and then they report back to the family like they're your handler. And then, because my parents are obsessed with appearances, they pivoted to the only place they still felt they could control the narrative, the public story. And this is where it gets messy, because I got a notification that my mother had posted on Facebook a long emotional post about the miracle of watching your child succeed. And she attached my article link like a trophy, and she wrote, "We always knew our girl had it in her." And I stared at the screen with this cold calm, because if you've ever watched someone rewrite your life while you're still alive, you know it feels like being erased in real time. And then I took screenshots, not because I plan to fight online, but because receipts keep you sane when a family starts gaslighting the public. And then Madison, my sister, did the worst thing she could do. She didn't apologize privately and quietly like a normal person. She posted an Instagram story saying, "So proud of my big sis. Our family has sacrificed so much." And I swear my brain paused for half a second on the word sacrificed, because what's sacrifice? Exactly, the sacrifice of mocking me at Thanksgiving, the sacrifice of recording my humiliation like it was content, the sacrifice of treating me like a family stain. And then, because she's Madison, she tried to fix her image by turning me into her content again, and she posted a vague quote about forgiveness and family first. And that's when I knew they weren't trying to repair a relationship. They were trying to repair reputation. Now here's the part that made my skin crawl, because it was so calculated. My father didn't message me directly at first. He went through a mutual professional contact back in Portland, a man I used to see at startup mixers, and that contact emailed me saying, "Your dad wants to connect. He's proud. He has some great ideas for how you can invest and build generational wealth." And I sat there thinking, wow, he's recruiting a stranger to speak to me like I'm a client. And then I replied to the contact politely, "Please don't share my information, and please don't relay messages." And then I forwarded the whole thing to my lawyer, because when a family starts using third parties to approach you, that's not affection, it's strategy. And then my father finally called from a different number, which tells you he already knew he was blocked, and he left a voicemail that started calm but had steel under it. "Raina, we need to talk, not because I want anything, but because you're being careless. You have no idea what you're doing with this kind of money, and people will come for you, and I'm still your father, whether you like it or not." And then he added the line that told me everything: "We need to discuss what's fair." And I swear my stomach tightened, because fair is the word people use when they want to take something that isn't theirs and make you feel guilty for protecting it. And then he said, "Your mother is taking this hard. She's not sleeping, and Madison feels horrible." And that is emotional blackmail 101. Don't address what you did. Just make the consequences your victim's responsibility. And then he finished with, "Call me back today," like he was assigning me homework. I didn't call him. And instead I did something most people don't do, but it's the reason I stayed safe and sane. I built a protocol like I was running a company, because boundaries without a system get broken. So I opened a document on my laptop, titled it Family Contact Plan, and I wrote out rules. If they contact through unknown numbers, do not answer. If they contact through third parties, send one neutral line to the third party and then no more. If they show up in person, do not engage. Call building security if they escalate legally. All communication through counsel only. And then I sent the plan to my lawyer, and she said, "Perfect." And then I added one more layer. I told my building management not to let anyone up without my approval, and I gave them a photo of my mother that I pulled from her own Facebook, because yes, it felt dramatic. But also I'm not letting someone who paid me to disappear walk into my new life like a surprise guest. And then, because the universe loves a test, 2 days later, I was leaving a grocery store with a small bag, nothing fancy, just eggs and fruit and coffee, and then I noticed a woman standing near the entrance, dressed too nicely for a quick errand, hair done, handbag tight in her grip like armor, and my brain recognized her before my heart did. It was my mother in Texas in my neighborhood, and my first reaction was this hot flash of disbelief, like, how dare you? And then my second reaction was pure clarity, because she wasn't there to apologize. She was there to re-enter the story physically so she could tell people she tried. And then she spotted me, and her face broke into that practiced sorrow, and she stepped forward with her arms half open like a stage cue, and she said, "Raina, sweetheart." And her voice cracked and people around us turned their heads, and that's when I understood the trap. She wanted a public scene where she looks like the loving mother, and I look like the cold daughter. And if you've ever had someone try to force you into a role in public, tell me, would you walk away or would you confront them? Because I made a choice right there that changed everything. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even frown. I simply stepped back, looked her in the eyes, and said, clearly calm enough for witnesses, "Do not approach me." And then I turned and walked straight back inside to customer service, and I told the staff, "This person is harassing me. I need security." And my mother followed a few steps, still calling, "I just want to talk." And then the security guard came, and I watched my mother's face shift when she realized she wasn't getting her emotional reunion scene. She was getting removed, and then she tried a last-minute pivot. I'm her mother. Like motherhood is a badge that overrides boundaries, and the guard said, "Ma'am, you need to leave." And then she looked at me one more time with this wounded, angry expression that finally broke through the mask, and she hissed, barely under her breath, "After everything we did for you." And I almost laughed again because it's always everything, never specifics, never accountability. Just a vague pile of everything, meant to make you feel indebted forever. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in silence, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, like I finally understood the truth, that the biggest risk wasn't them taking my money, it was them taking my peace by dragging me back into the old family theater. And then my lawyer called and said, "Your father emailed again." And I said, "What now?" And she said, "He's asking for a formal sit-down," and he used the words, "family agreement." And I stared at the wall, because a family agreement is just a contract written in gilt ink. And then she added one more sentence that made my blood run cold. He also hinted he might contact the press to clear up misunderstandings if you won't respond. And that's when I realized they weren't just chasing me. They were preparing to punish me for saying no. And the next move I made would decide whether I stayed silent and let them rewrite me again, or whether I finally told the truth in a way they couldn't edit. The moment my lawyer said my father hinted at contacting the press, I felt that old childhood switch flip, the one where your body goes cold before your mind catches up, because when a family is willing to weaponize reputation, they are no longer asking for connection, they are announcing control. And then I did what I've learned to do when someone threatens the narrative. I stopped reacting emotionally and started moving like a chess player, and I told my lawyer, "Forward me every email, every voicemail transcription, and make a timeline, because in real life, timelines are truth." And then I opened a notebook and wrote 3 columns. What they said, what they did, what I can prove, because if you're watching this and your family is the type to rewrite history, you already know feelings don't win arguments, documentation does. And then, right on schedule, my father escalated, because he always escalates when he doesn't get immediate compliance, and he sent one of those long, polished emails with fake warmth on the surface and a knife underneath. It started with, "Raina, we love you," and then it pivoted to, "You're being influenced." And then it ended with, "If you continue refusing to meet, we will have no choice but to correct the story publicly." And the phrase "correct the story" made my jaw tighten, because what he meant was smear me with a smile. And then I called my lawyer and asked one question. "If he goes public, what's the risk?" And she said, The risk isn't legal, it's reputational, and reputational damage can hurt opportunities even when you're in the right. And then she paused and added, but we can also control the frame if we anticipate it. And that sentence right there is the difference between being a victim and being a strategist. So I said, okay, we anticipate. And then we built a plan that felt almost ridiculous until you've lived through a family like mine. Step 1, lockdown access. We changed my phone number, not because I was scared, but because I was tired of the adrenaline spikes every time an unknown number lit up my screen. Step 2, legal firewall. My lawyer drafted a simple cease and desist that didn't sound dramatic. It sounded boring, the way real consequences sound. No contact, no third parties, no workplace outreach, no threats. Step 3, evidence pack. We pulled screenshots of my mother's Facebook post, Madison's forgiveness story, the old Thanksgiving video screenshots that still floated around, the voicemails where my father said, "What's fair?" And then, because I'm not careless, I included the part most people forget, proof of the original humiliation, the plane ticket, the check copy, the date, because the public always asks, did that really happen? And you want to answer before they get to doubt you. And then, while we were doing all that, a pattern interrupt hit my day like a slap, because I was at a quiet little coffee shop, laptop open, headphones in, trying to work like a normal person, and then the barista leaned over and said, "Ma'am, there's a man outside asking about you." And my stomach dropped, and then I looked through the window and I saw him, my father, standing there like he belonged in my life, wearing his respectable man jacket, hands folded, that patient smile, the one he uses when he's about to make you feel unreasonable. And then I realized he wasn't alone. Madison was with him, and she had her phone already in her hand, not even pretending. And then my brain did this quick calculation. If I step outside and speak, I become the clip, I become the soundbite, I become the daughter yelling at her father in public, and if I stay inside and hide, I become the guilty one. So I did the third option, the one that keeps you safe and keeps you in control. I stood up calmly, walked to the counter, and said softly, "Please call the manager. That man is not allowed to contact me." And the barista blinked like she didn't know what to do. And then the manager came over, and I spoke like I was reading a weather report. "I'm being harassed by family members. I need them removed." And then the manager looked outside, and then he walked out there. And I watched through the glass like it was a movie I didn't ask to be in. And then my father did exactly what fathers like mine do. He turned on charm. He pointed at the building like he was making a reasonable request. He probably said something like, "I just want to talk." And then Madison stepped forward and lifted her phone higher, trying to capture it, trying to bait me into a scene. And when the manager told him to leave, my father's face shifted, not angry, offended, like the world had violated his status. And then he tapped on the glass with one finger like he was summoning a waiter, and I didn't flinch. I just stared back and shook my head once, and then I saw his mouth form the words, "You're being ridiculous." And that's when I knew this was no longer about money. This was about obedience. And then they left, but not before Madison swung her phone toward the window to get my silhouette. And I almost laughed because she still thinks life is content. She still thinks humiliation is entertainment. She still thinks she can edit reality into her favor. And then I sat back down, and my hands were steady, but my heart was loud. And I thought, this is what people don't tell you. Success doesn't just bring money. It brings predators, and sometimes your first predators were your last name. And then I got home, and there was an email waiting from a local Portland reporter, subject line, "Quick question about your family." And I stared at it like it was a live wire because my father had done it, he had gone fishing, and he was trying to use the press to pressure me into contact. So here's what I did, and if you ever deal with this, listen close. I didn't respond emotionally, and I didn't respond alone. I forwarded it to my lawyer and asked her to reply with a neutral statement, and we crafted it like this: Raina does not comment on private family matters. Any claims suggesting family involvement in her business are false. Please direct any legal inquiries to counsel. Short, firm, boring, because boring is what shuts down drama. And then, because I'm not naive, We took a second step. We reached out to one trusted journalist I had spoken to during the acquisition coverage, someone who respected boundaries, and we quietly gave them context off the record, not to start a war, but to prevent a hit piece, because sometimes the best way to avoid being misrepresented is to make sure at least one credible person knows the truth. And then something happened that made my blood boil in a new way. My father sent a final message to my lawyer saying he wanted a family meeting with neutral mediation, and he listed his proposed mediator, a pastor from their church in Portland, a man who had never once asked me how I was, a man whose version of mediation would be honor your parents. And that's when I understood the shape of their plan. They weren't trying to fix a relationship, they were trying to put me in a room with authority figures who would shame me into giving them access, money, and control. And then my lawyer asked me, "Do you want to respond?" And I said, "Yes, but one time, and it will be final." So we sent one message, and it was plain: no insults, no debate, just truth. Reina declines mediation. She will not meet in person. Any further contact, direct or indirect, will be treated as harassment. This is your notice. And then I sat there and felt something I didn't expect, not relief, not joy, something like grief with a backbone, because even when you're right, it still hurts to admit your own parents would rather manage you than love you. And then, because my father cannot tolerate losing, he tried a new angle. He had Chloe, my mother's sister, mail me a package, and inside was a baby photo of me and a handwritten note that said, "Remember who you are, remember your family." And it was such a sweet-looking weapon, because baby photos are meant to soften you. And then I looked at that picture and I thought about the little girl in it, and I didn't feel guilt. I felt protective, because that little girl deserved parents who clapped for her even when nobody else was watching, and she didn't get them. And then I did something that surprised even me. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a folder with the other receipts, because I finally understood the moral of all this. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're prevention. They stop the same harm from repeating in a new outfit. And then, late that night, my lawyer called again, and her voice had that tone that means this is real. And she said, "Your father just filed something in Oregon." And I sat up straight and said, "Filed what?" And she said, "A petition not strong but noisy, requesting an accounting and claiming you used family support to build the company." And for a second, I just stared at the wall, because it was so shameless, it was almost impressive. And then I felt that calm come back, the one that only shows up when you realize the person across from you has no bottom. And I said, "Okay." And my lawyer said, "We'll crush it." And I said, "No." And she paused, and I continued, "We won't just crush it. We're going to show the pattern. We're going to show the dates. We're going to show the ticket, the check, the overheard comments, the public posts, the coffee shop stunt, the reporter outreach, all of it. Because if he wants to put this in a courtroom, then he just dragged his mask under bright lights." And then my lawyer went quiet for a beat and said, "That's exactly the right instinct." And in that moment, I realized the next phase wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. And the scariest part is I could already picture my father's face when he realizes he can't charm a timeline. And then my phone buzzed with a new unknown number text. Just 4 words: "You will regret this." And I didn't reply, because I didn't need to. I just took a screenshot, added it to the folder, and I whispered to myself, not angry, just certain, "No, you will." Because the next step I took wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be precise. And when precision meets hypocrisy, something always breaks. By the next morning, my lawyer had already pulled the docket and sent me the case number. And I'm not going to lie to you, seeing your own name in a filing hits different, because it's not just paperwork. It's someone trying to drag your identity into a public arena and then pretend it's family concern. And then I did the most unglamorous thing that ended up being the most powerful thing. I started building my war room like a boring adult: folders, timestamps, PDF prints. And then I called my accountant. Not because I was scared I'd done something wrong, but because I wanted to make sure every number I ever touched could stand up in court with its shoes shined and its hands clean. And then my lawyer laid it out in plain English. He's not filing this because he has a winning claim, he's filing it because he thinks the pressure will make you negotiate. And I want you to pause right there and tell me in the comments what you would do. Would you fold for peace, or would you fight for boundaries? Because this is one of those moments where family loyalty gets used like a rope, and they only call it love while they're tightening it around your neck. And then she said the part that made my skin prickle. He's requesting an accounting, and he's hinting at undue influence and family contributions to the business. And that last phrase, family contributions, made me laugh for half a second. Not because it's funny, but because it's insulting in a way that is almost creative, because these are the same people who couldn't contribute to a handshake at your graduation, but suddenly they want credit on the scoreboard. And then we started preparing the response, and I'm telling you, the how matters because people hear lawyer and think drama, but it's actually relentless detail. We answered each claim with receipts. And when I say receipts, I mean bank statements showing my rent paid by me, tuition paid by me, the early invoices for servers, software licenses, and contractor work paid by me, and then we attached the scholarship letters. And then we attached the tax returns from the years I lived like a ghost in that tiny studio apartment, and then we attached the timeline of Chloe's paid for private college, because if my parents wanted to argue they invested in their children, I wanted the court to see exactly who got the investment and who got told to figure it out. And then something else happened, something petty but dangerous. My mother's friend from her country club messaged me on LinkedIn, of all places, with that soft voice of concern in typed form. Raina, your mother is worried sick, please call her. The stress could affect her health. And I stared at it, because that's the oldest trick in the family handbook. Weaponize illness, weaponize guilt, weaponize the fact that you were raised to be the one who cleans up messes you didn't make. And then I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer and said, add it, because that's how you win. You don't argue with the manipulation, you document it and you show the pattern. And then the real escalation hit. My father filed for an emergency hearing to prevent dissipation of assets, which is legal language that basically tries to paint me as someone who is about to run off and hide money. And if you've never been through something like this, let me tell you what that feels like. It feels like your character is being mugged in public while you're standing right there. Because the person filing it knows the words sound serious to strangers, and strangers don't pause to ask if it's true. They just hear the accusation, and then the doubt sticks. So my lawyer and I spent 2 straight days building what she called the clean hands package. Every account, every transfer, every investment, every donation, categorized, explained, and timed. And it was exhausting in a way that isn't physical. It's spiritual, because you're basically proving you're not the villain in a story you never agreed to be cast in. And then, while I'm buried in this, I get a text from an unknown number that says, "We can settle this privately before you embarrass your mother." And I read it twice and realized what they were really saying. "We will call you cruel if you don't surrender." And then I asked you again in my head, because I know you've lived through it too. Why is the person enforcing a boundary always labeled the problem, but the person stomping on it gets called hurt? Why is respect treated like a favor when it's supposed to be the baseline? And then the first hearing date came fast, and my lawyer told me we could appear remotely, but I said no because I wanted to look the judge in the eye, not for theatrics, but for control, because if my father was going to perform, I wanted the court to see who was steady and who was selling a story. The courthouse was in Portland, gray sky, wet sidewalks, that cold drizzle that feels like the city itself is sighing, and I walked in with my lawyer, and my father was already there, standing with Chloe and my mother like they were a united front, like the Thanksgiving table all over again. Only this time the table had a seal on the wall and consequences in the air. Chloe was dressed like she was going to brunch, expensive coat, hair done, and she looked at me with that fake sympathetic face, the one that says, "We're trying to fix you." And my mother didn't look sympathetic at all. She looked angry that I had made her show up, because to her, anything that stains her image feels like violence. And then my father walked up and did the exact thing I knew he would do. He opened his arms slightly like he wanted to hug me, so anyone watching would think, "Oh, look at this loving father," and he said softly, "Raina, we don't have to do this." And I took one step back, calm, and said, "You filed this, not me." And my lawyer's hand touched my elbow, not to hold me back, but to remind me, stay on the record, stay clean. And then we went inside, and here's the thing that surprised me. The judge wasn't impressed by the drama. She was tired. You could see it, tired in the way people get when they've seen every version of manipulation dressed up as righteousness. And she asked my father's lawyer one question that sliced right through all the noise. What specific contributions did the petitioners make to the company or the acquisition? And his lawyer started talking in circles, emotional support, raising the child, providing a home. And then the judge's eyebrow lifted like, "That's parenting." And she said, "That's not equity." And I swear to you, I saw my father's confidence wobble for the first time. Not collapse, but wobble, because he's used to controlling rooms with tone and authority, and this judge didn't care about his tone. And then my lawyer stood up and did something that felt like watching someone pull a tablecloth off a table without breaking a glass. She didn't insult them. She didn't even sound angry. She just laid down facts, timeline, independent finances, documented lack of family support, the check and plane ticket, the overheard comments, the subsequent harassment, the attempts to contact press, and the court's atmosphere changed. Because facts have weight, and weight changes rooms. And then the judge denied the emergency request. Not the full case yet, but she denied the attempt to freeze anything, and she said, "This appears to be a family dispute being laundered through the court." And I almost exhaled too loudly, because when a judge says something like that, it means she sees the game. And then we walked out into the hallway and Chloe followed. And here comes the part that still makes my stomach twist. She stopped me like we were sisters in a movie, tears ready on cue, and she whispered, "If you just give them something, all of this goes away." And I looked at her and said, "You mean if I pay the ransom, the hostage takers leave me alone?" And she flinched because it's ugly when you say it plainly. And then she leaned closer and hissed, "You think you're better than us now?" And I said quietly, "No, I think I'm free." And I walked away. And then outside, my father called my name, loud enough for people to turn their heads, and he said, "We're still your family." And I turned back just once and said, "Family doesn't threaten reporters and file petitions." And I left. And then, that night, the twist came in through my lawyer like a meteor. She called and said, "We just got a notice. Your father's counsel is requesting discovery from your former company's acquiring firm," and my heart thumped, because that means he's trying to dig into the acquisition, to find anything to twist. And then she added, "And we're going to respond with our own discovery." And I said, "What do we request?" And she said, "Their communications, their posts, any evidence of intent, and we can subpoena Chloe's deleted video metadata if it exists." And I sat there in my quiet house and felt the anger sharpen into something cleaner, because if Chloe's little recording habit had left a trail, it was about to walk into daylight. And then my phone buzzed again, a known number, and it was a photo this time, a screenshot of a draft social media post, my mother's account, typed out like a threat disguised as a prayer. "When your child is led astray by greed." And underneath it, my father's comment already written, "We tried everything." And I stared at it and realized they weren't just trying to win legally, they were trying to win socially, to poison the room around me so they could force me back into their control. And then I did the only sane thing. I sent it to my lawyer and she replied, "Good, that helps." And that's when it clicked for me. Every time they escalate, they create evidence. Every time they perform, they leave fingerprints, and the next step wasn't going to be me defending myself in public, it was going to be me letting the court see their hands clearly. And then my lawyer said one last sentence before she hung up, a sentence that made me sit up straight. "Raina, there's a hearing coming where the judge may order testimony, and if Chloe gets on the stand, she'll have to answer under oath why she was recording you at Thanksgiving." And I stared at the wall, because I could already hear Chloe's voice trying to laugh her way out of it. And I could already see the judge's face when she realizes this was never about concern. And then I thought, if you've ever been the scapegoat in your family, you know this exact feeling. The moment you realize the truth isn't just something you carry, it's something you can finally place down in front of people who can't ignore it. And the wild part is, my family still thought they were directing the story, but they had no idea the next scene was going to force them to explain themselves in a place where, because we're your parents, doesn't count as an answer. The next hearing hit like a calendar reminder you can't snooze, because it wasn't just more court. It was the hearing where the judge would decide whether this stayed a petty family tug-of-war or turned into a full, sworn, on-the-record dissection of who did what and why, and by the time I walked into that courthouse again, the air already felt different, like the building itself knew someone was about to get caught in their own story. My lawyer, Marin, met me at the steps with a coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other, and she didn't even say hello first. She said, "We got a response from the acquiring firm and they're not playing." And then she slid a paper out like it was a weapon because the firm's counsel had agreed to comply with discovery, but only through formal channels, meaning if my father wanted to poke around for leverage, he was about to do it under rules, deadlines, and scrutiny, not through intimidation and rumor. And then we walked inside, and I saw them before they saw me. My father standing too straight like a man trying to iron out guilt with posture, my mother in that same polished coat like she was attending a charity luncheon, and Chloe hovering with her phone in her hand out of habit, not recording this time, but gripping it like a security blanket, and I swear I almost laughed. Because the one time she needed her camera the most, she couldn't use it, not in a courtroom where a judge can look you dead in the face and ask why you feel entitled to document someone's humiliation. And if you've ever been in a room where your family is smiling at you like they've got you cornered, you already know what I felt. That tight little coil in your chest that says, don't react, don't give them the satisfaction, make them carry their own ugliness. We took our seats, and my father's attorney started with a new angle, a slick one. He argued that my success was unexpected and sudden, and that my family had reasonable concerns about my ability to manage large sums and public attention, and I watched my father nod along like he was listening to a weather report, not a narrative he paid for, and then the attorney tried to suggest the check and the plane ticket were a good faith effort to help me transition, like paying someone to disappear is a kindness if you call it a transition. The judge, Judge Holloway, listened, expression blank, and then she did the thing smart judges do. She asked for specifics. What evidence do you have that Ms. Reyes is incapable? And my father's lawyer gave her what I expected, vibes and family anecdotes. She's always been sensitive. She isolates. She's stubborn. And it was almost comical hearing grown adults use playground labels as if they're legal arguments. And then Marin stood up and said, "Your Honor, we'd like to address the claim of concern with the most relevant evidence, the petitioner's own conduct." And the judge nodded once, and Marin turned slightly and said, "We have subpoena responses and sworn declarations regarding attempted contact with media and third parties." And my mother's head snapped up, because she didn't think her little concern campaign counted as harassment until it was printed on paper with a header. Marin read a brief portion of an email my father sent to a distant cousin, asking for any embarrassing stories from Raina's teen years that might help people understand her instability. And the courtroom went quiet in that particular way, where you can feel everyone's brain doing the same math at the same time. You're not worried about her. You're trying to discredit her. And then Marin offered the screenshot of that drafted, led astray by greed post, and she didn't call it what it was. She just said, "This appears to be an attempt to pre-frame public opinion against Ms. Reyes while litigation was active." And the judge's eyes narrowed, because judges hate off-court manipulation. They hate it like doctors hate dirty instruments. Then the judge said the words that made my stomach drop and my spine straighten at the same time. "I'm inclined to permit limited testimony today." And she looked right at Chloe. "Ms. Wren, you're listed as a potential witness. Step forward." And Chloe's face did this quick flicker, like her skin forgot what expression to hold, and she glanced at her husband like he could hand her an exit. She walked to the stand with that half-smile people wear when they think charm can outrun consequences, and she swore in, and I watched her right hand tremble just slightly. Not enough for a dramatic moment, but enough that I knew her body wasn't buying the lie her mouth was about to try. My father's lawyer asked soft questions first, the easy ones. Did you feel your sister was struggling? Were your parents worried? Did you all believe you were helping? And Chloe nodded, yes, 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 like she was reading a script she'd rehearsed in the mirror. And then he asked about Thanksgiving, and she described it as a supportive family talk, and I almost choked on the audacity. Because supportive is not when your father announces your exile between turkey and sweet potatoes while your sister records it like it's entertainment. And then Marin stood up for cross-examination. And this is where the how matters, because the goal isn't to yell, the goal is to walk someone into their own contradiction so cleanly they can't call it an attack. They can only call it the truth. Marin asked, Ms. Wren, did you record your sister that night? And Chloe's chin lifted. I took a video, yes, and Marin said, why? And Chloe did the laugh, the little come-on laugh. It was family, it was a moment. And Marin didn't react. She just asked again slower, what was the purpose of recording your sister receiving a one-way ticket? And Chloe's cheeks flushed, and she said, for memories. And I swear even the court reporter paused mentally, because memories is what you say when you don't want to say humiliation. Marin then asked, did you post it? And Chloe hesitated, and the judge leaned forward a fraction, because hesitation in court is loud, and Chloe said, briefly, and Marin said, where? And Chloe answered, my social. And Marin said, did you delete it? And Chloe said, yes, and Marin's voice stayed calm. Because it was cruel, or because it backfired. And Chloe blinked hard, and my father's lawyer objected, and the judge overruled, and Chloe said, I didn't mean it like that. Which is the universal language of people who meant it exactly like that. And then Marin dropped the needle. Ms. Wren, are you aware that the platform retained metadata and that we have a preservation notice confirming the upload time, caption draft, and shares? And Chloe's face went pale because she thought deletion meant erasure. And here's where I need you to do something for me real quick, because I see the numbers and I know a lot of you watch these stories every day but haven't subscribed yet. And if you've ever dealt with family betrayal, favoritism, or being treated like the problem while someone else plays the hero, kindly join our community right now and hit subscribe. Thank you, alright, because this next stretch is where the mask really starts slipping. Chloe tried to recover by saying she didn't remember the caption, and Marin said, we do, and the judge allowed it because it wasn't gossip anymore, it was evidence of motive, and Marin read the draft caption out loud. Not word for word like a dramatic reading, just enough to reveal the intent. It framed me as finally leaving, finally moving on, like I was a stain being scrubbed off the family countertop. Chloe's eyes filled, not with remorse, with panic, and then she tried the pivot. I was under pressure, and Marin asked, pressure from whom? And Chloe looked at my mother for half a second too long, and my mother's mouth tightened like a drawstring, and then Chloe whispered, my parents wanted it documented, and the room didn't explode. It didn't need to, because that one sentence did more damage than yelling ever could. My father's lawyer tried to redirect, but the judge was already writing, pen moving steadily like she'd been waiting for the real story to finally walk in and sit down. Then my father took the stand, and he tried to do his usual thing. He spoke with authority. He talked about providing, about guidance, about sacrifices, and the judge asked him one direct question. Did you intend the check and ticket to remove your daughter from your social life? And he said, no, it was to help her. And then Marin asked, why a one-way ticket? And he said, because she needed a clean break. And Marin asked, from what exactly? And he said, from failure. And his voice didn't even crack. And that's when I realized something sick. He didn't think he was the villain. He thought he was the editor of my life story, cutting out the parts that embarrassed him. And then the judge asked about the phone calls, the attempts to discuss tax implications, And my father tried to make it sound responsible, and Marin asked, responsible like advising or responsible like extracting? And my father's jaw clenched, and he said, she owes us respect. And the judge said quietly, respect is not equity. And that line hit the room like a gavel, without the sound. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't rule on everything, not yet, but she set a new schedule and she issued a warning on the record about harassment and public smear attempts. And as we walked out, Chloe couldn't even look at me, and my mother's eyes were glossy with rage, not grief, rage that her carefully curated family narrative had just been read back to her in a language she couldn't control. And then, as Marin and I stepped into the cold air outside, she opened her folder and said, we got one more thing from metadata, and it's the reason they're going to panic. And my heart kicked, because every time you think you've seen the worst of a family's betrayal, there's always another drawer, another secret, another little piece of proof they didn't know they left behind. And Marin looked at me and said, the video wasn't just posted, it was sent privately to someone important before it went public. And I felt my stomach drop because I already knew what that meant. They weren't just mocking me. They were shopping my humiliation to somebody for leverage, and the next name she said would tell me exactly how dirty this was about to get. Marin didn't say the name right away. She let it hang there like a smell you can't ignore, and then she flipped the page and said, they sent the video to the acquiring company's integration director. And I felt my whole body go cold because that wasn't family gossip anymore. That was sabotage with a suit on. And then she added, not just the video, a message with it. And I asked, what did it say? And Marin answered, it claimed you were mentally unstable, that you were spiraling, and that the company should reconsider handing you any executive role or payout without involving the family. And for a second, I couldn't even speak, because imagine the kind of parent who doesn't just doubt you at the dinner table, but tries to erase you in your industry like you're a typo. And then my first thought wasn't even anger. It was this sharp, ugly clarity. Oh, so the ticket wasn't about helping me start fresh. It was about getting me out of the way before the money hit. And then when the money hit, they wanted to step in like managers collecting commission on work they never did. We walked down the courthouse steps, and the city sounded too normal for what I was hearing. Cars passing, a bike bell, somebody laughing on a corner. And I remember thinking, the world keeps moving even when your family decides to become your enemy. Marin pulled up the email chain on her phone and showed me the timestamp. It was sent the night after Thanksgiving, which meant while I was driving back to my apartment in silence, trying not to throw up from the words I overheard in the hallway, they were already spinning a story about me to strangers. I said, so they try to poison the deal. And Marin said, they try to poison you. And that distinction matters, because when people are threatened by your growth, they don't just attack the outcome. They attack your credibility, so no one believes you deserve the outcome. The next morning, we didn't wait to see what happens. We moved like people who understand that some fires don't go out, they spread, and Marin filed an emergency motion to expand the protective order request, not based on hurt feelings, based on documented interference with business relationships. And then she drafted a notice to the acquiring company's counsel explaining that any claims made by my family were false, retaliatory, and part of an active legal dispute. And then she told me something that felt almost insulting to my intelligence until I realized she was right. She said, you cannot respond emotionally, even once, not to them, not online, not through friends, because they want a reaction they can screenshot. And I nodded, because my whole life I'd been trained to stay calm while people poked me like I was a science experiment. That afternoon I had a call with the integration director, a woman named Patrice, and she was polite but guarded, the kind of voice that says, we've seen things go wrong before, and we'd like to avoid a scandal. Patrice said, we received some concerning material, and I said, I know, and I'm sorry you were dragged into something private. And then I did what my parents never expected from the family failure. I stayed factual. I explained the pending litigation. I offered documentation. I confirmed my legal counsel's contact, and I asked one simple question. Did the message ask for anything? And Patrice hesitated, and then she said, "It implied that cooperation from your family would make things easier for you." And I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable it hurt. And then I said, "There's your motive." And Patrice went quiet. And then she said, "We'll route everything through counsel." And the call ended. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with an unknown number, and when I answered, it was my father, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. It was, "We need to talk like adults." And I said, "You forfeited adult conversation when you tried to label me unstable to my employer." And he snapped, "Watch your tone." Like he could still ground me at 29. And then he tried the classic pivot. "We're worried about you." And I said, "Worried people don't send videos to executives." And then he lowered his voice and got practical. "You don't understand how these things work. Families get involved. It's normal." And I said, "Extortion is not normal." And he went silent for half a beat. And then he said, "You wouldn't even be here without us." And I felt that old familiar rage crawl up my throat. The rage of being told the bare minimum of parenting is a debt you owe forever. And I said, "Raising a child is not an investment portfolio." And then I hung up, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like I'd finally stopped letting poison sit in my bloodstream just because it came in a family-shaped bottle. The court moved faster once the business interference came in, because judges might tolerate messy families, but they don't tolerate calculated harassment that spills into third parties. And at the next hearing, Judge Holloway was different, less patient, more direct. And when my father's attorney tried to frame it as protective concern, the judge asked, "Did you disclose the pending dispute in your communication to the company?" And he didn't answer quickly enough, and the judge looked at my father and said, "You tried to influence her employment outcome by calling her unstable, is that correct?" And my father said, "I was trying to help." And the judge said, "Help would have been therapy, not sabotage." And then she ordered no contact, no indirect contact, no contacting my employer or affiliates, and she warned of sanctions and something about hearing it out loud. Hearing an authority figure name it for what it was made my chest loosen for the first time in months. Outside the courtroom, Chloe caught up to me, alone, no phone, no husband, no smug audience, just her in the raw daylight, and she said, "Raina, please." And I stopped walking, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because I wanted to see if she could tell the truth without a stage. She said, "I didn't know Dad sent it." And I asked, "Did you know he wanted it filmed?" And she swallowed and whispered, "Yes." And I asked, "Did you enjoy it?" And she flinched like I slapped her, and then she did what Chloe always did when cornered. She tried to turn it into a sob story about herself. "I've always been under pressure." And I said, "So was I. I just didn't turn pressure into cruelty." And she started crying, and I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt fatigue because tears don't erase patterns. And then she said, "Can we just go back?" And I said, "Back to what?" Me begging to be treated like a person. And that's when she finally said something honest. She said, "I thought if you stayed small, I stayed safe." And that landed hard because it explained everything, the recording, the jokes, the smugness. She didn't hate me. She feared what my success would expose about her. I walked away after that, and I didn't call it forgiveness or closure. I called it information, because sometimes the last gift someone gives you is the truth about why they kept hurting you. The money hit my account 2 weeks later, exactly on schedule, and I didn't go on a shopping spree. I didn't post a new life montage. I sat at my kitchen table in Austin with a mug of coffee, and I stared at the number until it stopped feeling like a fantasy and started feeling like responsibility. And then I did something my parents never taught me. I protected myself like I mattered. I hired a wealth advisor who didn't know my family. I set up security. I locked down my information. I changed numbers. I updated every privacy setting. And I wrote one short email to my extended family. Not angry, not pleading, just clear. I am safe. I am well. And I am not available for discussion. Because the moral lesson in all of this is simple and brutal. Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are the price of peace. when someone keeps proving they can't be trusted. Months later, I stood on a stage at a tech conference and I spoke about resilience, and I didn't name my parents. I didn't drag them publicly. I just said, some of you built your dreams while the people closest to you laughed. Keep building anyway. And after the talk, a woman in the front row came up, older, silver hair, kind eyes, and she squeezed my hand and said, I wish I'd learned that sooner. And I realized the real revenge wasn't the courtroom or the headlines. It was the quiet rebuilding of my own dignity in a city where nobody called me embarrassing. The last time I heard from my father was through his attorney asking if I'd consider a family settlement, and Marin replied with one sentence, Ms. Reyes is not negotiating a relationship, and that was the end. And if you're sitting there right now thinking, okay, but did they ever truly feel it? Did they ever really understand what they did? I'll tell you the truth. People like that understand consequences more than they understand pain. And that's why the only language that worked here was paperwork, silence, and distance. I didn't destroy them. They did that themselves the moment they chose image over integrity, and I simply refused to be the person they could step on to feel taller. And then one day, when you least expect it, the peace shows up, not loud, not dramatic, just a normal Tuesday where your phone doesn't buzz with manipulation and your home feels like yours and you realize you're not bracing for impact anymore. If this hit a nerve, I want you to tell me in the comments, did my parents cross the line the moment they handed me that ticket, or the moment they tried to poison my career behind my back? And what would you have done differently? Because I read these and I promise you, your story helps somebody else stop feeling crazy. And when you're done here, don't just click away. Watch the next story on this channel, because the next one is about a family betrayal that looks like concern on the surface but hides a money play underneath. And once you see how that trap works, you'll never walk into it again.